Hey Vance, how's it going?
Very well.
Good. See who turns up. Not sure how suitable this time is for everybody, but give it a couple of minutes anyway. Whereabouts you based yourself?
I'm in Manila in the Philippines.
Okay,
It's 11 p.m. here now.
very good. Nice part of the world. Okay. Hey, look. Hey, Rada.
Hi, everyone.
Let's give 1 or 2 more minutes and see who else will join.
Hello, Karen. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, maybe we'll get started and see how we get on. I'm going to try and share some material I shared yesterday on the Slack channel. I don't know if everybody got a chance to take a look at it. But anyway, today I'm hoping will be more of a discussion and maybe setting of a terms of reference for this grouping going forward. Hopefully with some concrete actions that we can take for a short to medium term sort of stabilization and of the modeling, plus a sort of a longer term strategy for alignment across NetFio and the broader industry. And I just have to figure out how to turn off everything else that pops up on my desktop before I start sharing. Just shut down Outlook, that would be good. And going to do not disturb. All right. Where am I? Might as well click on the link I shared directly in the modeling group and bring that up. And what I was proposing to do, unless anybody has any better suggestions, was to walk through the material, just a bit of background on previous material that's been produced from the NetFio community. And then let's hopefully you can see that. Does that work for people?
I can see the deck.
Cool. No, I'm not sure how I can. Hopefully, if you raise your hands or whatever else on the advances is thumbs up. That's good. So it means I can see responses on one screen and I can talk on the other screen. So, and I'll try and make notes in here as we go, and we'll see how far we get. My proposal was to just kind of take a pass through the prior art in this space and the existing material that we have to work on, then talk a little bit about how we as a community want to take modeling forward within NetFio, and maybe talk a little bit about how APIs and model governance happens in Kubernetes. And since NetFio is quite close to Kubernetes and its kind of origin story, it might be a useful baseline to kind of use as a starting point. And then I thought we'd wrap up with some possible next steps that taking the liberty of trying to sketch out. If we get that far, so far so good, or so much the better. All right, so I'm going to just walk through this. prior art, I guess, just to bring everybody up to speed. You're probably all aware of it, but we have the API directory under API repo under the Nefio project, and it contains a bunch of KRM based models, and these are kind of the baseline models that are used across the Nefio project. And within that, then there's the specific set of models defined in KRM for networks, cluster context, network configurations, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of stuff that exists. Tal, before Christmas or towards the end of last year, produced this document, which has an overview of, I guess, the general principles for modeling within Nefio, and then some information about how he's documented aspects of that in this picture. So you can see he's got various views of how topology relates to instances and interfaces and classes and repositories and so on and so forth. And then he's broken out some of the contents of the modeling repository and to kind of showcase them here, to give you an example of what they look like, and then, you know, drilling down into various different sort of dependency relationships and so on and so forth. I don't want to dwell too much on sort of introspecting this document per se, just to kind of show that it's there and that it's available in case you weren't aware of it. Then we have the Bernard made a kind of a presentation around concepts, guidelines, and recommendations for modeling. I'm not going to try and paraphrase the content of it here, but I mean, I guess basically what he's saying is that we need to have modeling guidelines, and I think maybe here, you know, if we don't have a common schema, we don't have an understanding of how our information models are structured, it's going to just make life harder, and the point of Nefio is to make life easier. So we have the modeling guidelines, which allow us to separate things into different domains. We'd have modeling guidelines that allow us to structure information so it can be interpreted by tools. And then we get consistency across the way in which tools can exchange information in a consistent manner. So these models that we're talking about are providing automation APIs for other systems to integrate towards. And if they're continually changing and continually evolving without a kind of a coherent approach to them, then it makes it much more difficult to manage those integrations between loosely coupled systems that have different life cycles and are undergoing sort of different development in different phases. So Nefio, as part of a broader ecosystem of tool chains within a CSP environment, needs to have good boundaries and good interfaces in order to make that integration work. And I'm probably preaching to the converted here. So you know, how do we go about making use of models? Various different ways in which we can do that. I won't go too much into this level of detail. Who's going to use it? We need tools to validate the contents. We need, you know, hydration or refinement of model information, applying configurations, getting information from places like inventories, comparing different states, et cetera, et cetera. And then we need certain levels of guidelines around versioning, types, naming, sort of specification definitions, and so on and so forth. And then how binding are the guidelines? Well, in principle, you can do what you want. It's an open source project, but as a community, we should have guidelines and we should adhere to them. And I think largely that's it's all fairly sensible stuff. And I think part of what we'd like to do out of this group is to help to come up with that sort of baseline set of recommendations. Okay, and then the last piece was Vance, this is yours. I don't know if you want to talk to this yourself, or am I okay to paraphrase on your behalf and you can jump in and correct me?
Go ahead.
And basically what I think you're talking about here is the need to have some kind of information model to inform what we do in design. Typically, when you're building an information model, you'll have some kind of sort of, and then this is an example, I guess, from standards where you'd have a kind of an umbrella information model that can then be broken down into different types of resource models or sort of information models in different domains. And then I think there's a view in here where you can break the information models down and then decompose them into data models that support different sort of representation types. This is an example of an inheritance. So this type of inheritance in the 3GPP. So I guess you're talking about sort of subnetworks and managed functions and links and management nodes all inheriting from this type of top level object class. And so you can have the separation of concerns that Bernard spoke about in his material can be managed through the use of an information model, which is a kind of an umbrella view, and then breaking it out into separate domains to manage their specific concerns.
Well, I think the point to be made there, if you go back to the previous one, is go to slide 3. So here on the bottom, we have different SDOs, right? So these are different organizations who are developing their own models, but those models maintain a degree of compatibility because they are both inheriting from the umbrella information model. And so that's one way of federating the models is with this inheritance. So if we can all agree on what the umbrella information model is, and you do that by making it fairly simple and very core
Abstract
concepts that are kind of abstract, of course, but just it's not very detailed. It's core concepts, and then the second way to federate is through touch points. But then slide 4, this is the high level model in 3GPP, which maps very well to the UIM. So everything in the 3GPP, all of their network resource models, which is what they call their information model, all can conform to this basic structure. And so it means that ETSI and MEF, who are similarly aligned, their models are quite compatible with each other. And so it would behoove us to recognize those patterns and to reuse them.
Good clarification. And I guess here this sort of top object class refers to this kind of umbrella, is it? And then I mean, these are all actually within 3GPP, aren't they?
Well, this is 3GPP. This is from their generic NRM, but this is a line. So all of these things are things that exist in the UIM. So basically all of the SDOs, ETSI and 3G, like ETSI and 3GPP do a very good job of maintaining compatibility, and one of the mechanisms for that is that they have a common umbrella information model, and this is it.
Okay, good. Okay, a model federation with touch point. This is the other one you're referring to there, which is where maybe
so
you can talk to that.
This is a lateral federation, and what it means is that you've got touch points where there's a relationship between something in one model from one SDO and something in another model from another SDO. And this is an example from 5G. So in 3GPP, the network slice subnet has a touch point, a couple touch points to the ETSI NFV information model. So the 3GPP view is like an application layer, right? It's talking about what these network functions are doing, what it's doing in the 3GPP network slicing scope. But in the ETSI NFV, it's infrastructure, right? So this network slice subnet has a touch point to a network service that's represented in NFV. And then each of those managed functions, like an AMF or an SMF or something, is actually has a relationship to a VNF, right? So the Etsy NFV, you can use that model to manage the infrastructure, and then you've got a relation so that we know that this AMF is represented by this VNF. So we've got that relationship.
Very good. And this is a similar, so this is a managed element, I guess, from the generic NRM, which in Etsy MEC is represented as a MEC host function. Is that right?
Well, no, there's a relationship there. So managed elements in 3GPP are related to the mobile host. On the right hand side, this is a more obvious one. When we're doing Edge, well, we've got a RAN that is covered by the Edge, right? So you need to understand how does this overlay onto the radio network, right? So so those exist, and these are touch points that exist in both of those models.
Okay. So then we talk about data models, and this is where maybe it gets into mapping to what we have in Nephew today. So you're talking
and
about
this is
Yep.
a really key point for everyone to understand, and people struggle with this a little bit. If most people are working with data models on a day-to-day basis, they just work with data models because they're not involved in standards development or really high-level architecture, and so they're working with data models. And so data models differ from information models in that information models are abstract and data models are concrete. So we've got a JSON schema. These are the JSON values that something has. That is the name of the attribute, and there it is. But you can represent the same thing in Yang or XML or something else, right? But you should have an information model that is consistent across that. So, and this is 3GPP are very good at doing this. They have their network resource models, which are abstract, and then they have stage 3, what they call stage 3 specifications for like wireline protocols. And those wireline protocols realize those information models. So those are data models. And so they will have the 5G stuff is in 28.541, and they actually provide 3 different models for that, 3 different stage 3 concrete realizations in Yang and JSON and XML.
And I think that's a key point. Sorry, go ahead, finish up.
It's such a key point, right? You need to have it model driven at the information level, and that should be consistent then when we create, and the thing is, the information changes very slowly. The protocols change all the time. There's a new protocol every few years. Oh no, yeah, we used to do things with netconf, and now we're doing GNMI or something, and there will be new ones in the future. But did the information change? Well, probably not, right? Or if anything, it was just incremental, right? The information is very consistent. It doesn't change much over time. The protocols can change every day, and then that's where all the struggle is, right? We struggle in this industry so much time is spent in doing integration, and if the data models were created independently, then that integration is enormous. If they are really true representations of a common information model, that process, you can have a mechanized translation, and it becomes quite simple to do. So this is just the really key point of the whole exercise.
So maybe that's a good point at which we can pivot into the discussion about sort of how we as an organization want to group, because I think what you just represented there is a standardization view of, you start with, you typically start with like a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, where you kind of, what's the general overview I want to create. of the system and we're trying to build, then you go into your stage 2 information models, and then you get into your sort of specific data models. And as you say, you can have multiple data models to represent different types of integration. The way Kubernetes has worked, I think, is more the other way around. And maybe people can correct me if I'm wrong in my representation or understanding of this, but my, how do I get rid of this box here to click on tabs? Oh, it goes away. Yeah, so wrong slide deck. That one there, no. Oh, there, probably. When we come from a Kubernetes perspective, it tends to have, as far as I can see anyway, it has more or less come from a data model that then gets exposed as maybe as an information model, and it has been extrapolated as an information model into other standardization groups. I don't know if people have a view on, has it been the other way around for Kubernetes?
So the first thing to understand is that the KRM, the Kubernetes resource model, is a data model.
Exactly. And Kubernetes has kind of, it has a reference for, I've put that in here as the Kubernetes API reference. So, I mean, a lot of what's represented in KRM would be things like containers, things like pods, et cetera, and then there are attributes that you can configure. But behind the hood of this is primarily being the data model that represents that in KRM, and this information is typically extracted from that. I don't know if you would say that there has been that traditional sort of information model to data model approach taken in the Kubernetes development. And I don't know if you have a view on, Tim, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. That's the point, right? So I don't think that's very common in environment. Certainly hasn't been common to date in Nepio, right? I don't think we've done information model.
Yes,
I know
exactly.
IETF doesn't do information models for everything they do. They just do data models, right? So that's the question that really comes into play, is that do we need to? We really dealing with it. I mean, is it really important that we have information models, or is it really better to deal with the data model? So, you know, I'm kind of, I'd like to have an information model that you can generate a data model from, for all the reasons that the gentleman put prior to this. But the question is, do we have the discipline, the people, and the will to do that, right? Because it's an extra burden that really doesn't lay code, if you will, right?
It
But it
doesn't
does
produce
help.
results quickly. I think it doesn't.
That's right.
I think it's,
Right.
and I think the challenge that we have is, do we want to show working systems quickly, and I think I agree with you, Vance, that, you know, I do sort of see that you need to have a language, a common language, and a common understanding that does not change particularly frequently between systems in order that they can integrate well. And I guess, how do we get to that so that so I think we do need an information model. That would be my position. But I guess the question is, do we start from there and then produce data models? Do we reverse engineer it periodically? Do we do a bit of both?
So my take on this, and some of the things I've just heard are the usual. I'll call it FUD, just to pick a fight. But my position is going to be this. Look, you can avoid doing it, but it's not like it doesn't exist. Data doesn't really mean anything. Data is a way of gathering information, right? So you do have an information model. You just haven't separated it from your data model, and you haven't thought about it. Okay. So the whole point of the exercise is in understanding that distinction and understanding where it's important. Okay. So if all you're doing is Kubernetes and you're never going to do anything else, then all you're going to do is you're going to work in the KRM data model. Then you may feel that you have no need for any of this discussion. On the other hand, do you need to actually reconcile how it federates with 3GPP or ETSI or ONF or other models? And maybe yes, maybe no. That question comes down to a principle here that I haven't really been able to glean from the group where we're heading with, and that's, is Nefio going to simply orchestrate configuration of these network functions, or is it going to play a role in managing a federated network? And I think you're going to find people who would argue in both ways for that. And if you go in the direction that I would hope is that we are, if you can go to those high level concepts about things like network slice or just subnet more generically. So let's just talk about subnet. So subnet is what we call a managed entity, right? If it's something that you need to manage and you're going to actually do it effectively, then you need a way of managing it. We call that then a managed object, right? Well, the managed object is the information model. Managed entity is the instance you're actually managing. And so are we going to manage a subnet that consists of various vendors and have an end-to-end representation of that, right? If not, then this doesn't become very important. On the other hand, I think there's a great opportunity here to solve some real industry problems if we would actually do that, right? And so I've heard some of our champions like from DT and others that actually have put at least alluded to some of those things in the requirements. And if we go that way, then we definitely need to be concerned about how the models are realized from 3GPP and ETSI and et cetera.
Okay. Anybody else have a view on that? I mean, are we just doing things in Kubernetes and focus kind of on an inward-looking perspective, or are we actually participating in a broader ecosystem with, I guess, other multi-vendor, multi-paradigm systems that we need to integrate with? My understanding, at least, is that the latter is the wanted position. Tim?
So since I guess I'm the FUD guy, because I'm just saying that, I don't have it. By the way, Tim Carey personally has no issue in developing an information model. I'm saying where I've seen this activity attempted, right? When there is only, and I think this is what you're getting to, when there's only one solution set, it doesn't, the value of it doesn't seem to exist necessarily, right? Or to the group, it's tough to see the value, right? And so there's organizations that I've been a part of that does an information model before they do a data model. There's organizations that I've been a part of that says, no, we do a data model and we do not have an information model. And both of those organizations have been successful. And the reason why people have data models that they don't do an information model is because they don't have multiple solutions. And so, and that was, I believe, that we don't have multiple solution sets, right? That we have requirements for. We have requirements for multiple solution sets, but an information model is the only way you're going to keep sanity in this place, right? So, I think you got it right. Do we have multiple solution sets, multiple data model instantiations, right? If the answer to that is yes, then I think you have to do an information model. If the answer to that is no, I don't know.
So just to say, if
and
I
I'm
captured your...
not trying to do FUD, guys. I really am not. I'm just saying that I've been in both worlds, right? And you know, Tim's preference is always information model before data model, but sometimes the community doesn't feel the need to do that.
Okay. I guess what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say is that it would be better to approach it from information model, data model, but generally there isn't necessarily, not everybody necessarily sees value in that, or
Yeah, if there's not multiple solution sets for the information model, it quickly becomes what value is to spend time doing the information model if the data model is the source of truth, right? The information model, what's the source of truth? The
yeah.
information model or is it the solution set? Well, it's really the information model. The solution sets may be in error, right? And yes, that's on the wire. So, you know, the things that use that data model think it's the source of truth, but in reality, it's an error, right? When there's a description.
Okay. And Vance, I think you made a comment earlier. We have an information model, whether we document it or not. So I mean, it's something that's there in it by definition of the fact that we're building a system with a data model.
But it's there because we define the data model.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. As an artifact, the information model, if you only have one solution set and you define the data model, that is your.
Yeah, so I think this slide is actually capturing things quite well. So the most, and yes, as much as I don't think it's very difficult to maintain an information model, it can be characterized as waterfall and requiring different skill sets and tools and consuming all kinds of time, and that could be true in some projects, but as Tim said, if we have more than the KRM, then we need to. So that really becomes the question, and I'm not seeing a future where we don't. If this is supposed to be something that is telecom specific, right? We want solutions that are that the operators are able to use to deploy 5G core or optical networks or RAN, then those are specific solution sets, and so we need some federation with the models that exist coming out of the SDOs that manage those things. Of course, I always have a more SDO mindset than probably most who in a very simpler removal of an abstraction, just look at the vendor offerings and how to work with them.
So the counter argument to that might be that Kubernetes didn't define an information model, and it eventually became, I guess, the de facto way of deploying workloads in a telco and IT environment. I don't know if that's and there are, I guess, touch points from Kubernetes into higher level information models that come from ORAN and ETSI and so on and so forth. But
aren't we doing something above that?
Yeah. I guess there has been some attempt to do modeling in that space in and around the kind of the lower level resource orchestration objects, and you can kind of say that maybe the Kubernetes more sort of data model first and then bubble up an information model from that approach. I'm just saying that it's not necessarily one way or the other way. I'm saying there's potentially different approaches to this, which is maybe what gets into my ways forward slide.
The assurance work group may well end up creating requirements that really become important to this consideration.
Mm. Okay. Does anybody, okay, so first of all, I think what I'm hearing, I think we're all agreed we need an information model. We have an information model. And what I want to get to is really how do we go about creating that information model, maintaining it and evolving it. I think that's kind of maybe not so much whether we need it or not. I think it's more to do, and I think Tim, you alluded to, you know, the community and having the resources to do that and maintain it, and wanting to do and maintain that type of artifact over time. I had a proposal. If I don't know if anybody wants to add any more to this point, or can I jump into a proposed next step? Not hearing any arguments. So what I wanted to say, my view on it is we're in a brownfield scenario already. So we have already got a set of data models that exist in the parts of Nephew that Tal started to document in his document. There are potential groupings that we can group those into that would do some mapping into things that are happening in different SDOs. And I pulled out ORAN as an example. And I know there's work happening in Working Group 6. I'm not, you know, up to speed on it, but there's work happening there in terms of mapping. Maybe it's more towards the Kubernetes and infrastructure type capabilities. But that there are entities there that would be related to what we're trying to describe here in Nephew. There's overall network topology work happening in Working Group 10, and then there are parts of the Nephew model that are specific to Nephew around package handling, repository management, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be my first proposal, is that we try and document our APIs in a similar fashion to the Kubernetes ones, build a set of reference documentation like this, so that the KRM, the models that we're describing in our API repository, can be visualized in this fashion that you can, you know, browse and search and understand them. That would be phase one. Phase two would be do that mapping into groups. And then the second phase would be for this group and this meeting series to, first of all, figure out, do we have principles on how to evolve these models? Do we want to do them in line with the Kubernetes principles, or do we want to do a more information model first approach? I've skipped a slide, actually. I'll continue through this and then I'll jump back to the other slide. Actually, no, I'm going to jump back to the other slide. Sorry, this was the slide I wanted to move to. And maybe, how do we want to develop going forward? So the first phase of that slide is really talking about getting a good way of understanding what we have, because we're in a brownfield scenario and there's already existing data models, and it would be good if we can get an understanding and visualize and browse and you know, read the models that we have. So that would be the first proposal. The second proposal is around how we go about evolving the data models and the associated information model. And that brings me back to the other point here, where we need, as a group, and maybe this is the fundamental existential question, do we want to take a kind of a code first, or maybe I change that to a data model first? And then we can reverse engineer or extrapolate an information model from that in terms of producing associated more abstract documentation to allow for architecture work and education and SDO integration. Or we do that first step of reverse engineering our information model, and then we use that as the baseline through which we evolve the data models, if that makes sense. First question I'll ask the group is, does that make sense? Those two options. And then the second question is, do people have an opinion on which of those is better or more appropriate for this community? Or is there something else that we should do entirely?
It's the right question.
It's the right question, Tim. Is that right?
That's what I said, yeah.
Okay, so good. The question makes sense, at least to one person. Do people have opinions?
Those are the only two options I see, right? So, at least for me, I don't know what else, how you
Yeah,
Right.
sorry, I joined a bit late, but yeah, this is exactly what we, I think, discussed in the last meeting. So thumbs up.
Okay, we were just doing a refresh of prior art, Tal, before this, so I don't think you missed too much. We had a good discussion about what Nepheo's role is and whether we need a data model and an information model. We had a view that information model exists, whether we define it or not. And I think Tim was saying that while starting from an information model would be a good way to work, maybe if we only have a single solution set, as in a single data model coming from that information model, it may not be justifiable to maintain both or to start from the information model. Particularly if we're in a brownfield scenario and we're in this kind of iterative development, we want to get working code out quickly, then the perceived overhead, at least, of maintaining an information model that precedes data model work might be seen as being a bottleneck.
Yeah, that makes sense, I guess. I would add the information model is especially important for integrations, for example, with ORAN and anything to do with observability. I mean, we have to start with an information model there. So
yeah, that was the kind of viewpoint here.
Good.
And so, yeah, so I think that the consensus, I think, in the group is that we do need an information model. I think the question is, do we extract that from the data models and do the data models first, or do we extract it from our current data models and then do all of our model evolution through the information model down into the data model? Is that a fair synopsis?
What about the, in the something else part? When we do this, we need to consider what Vance was telling, like about deriving from the UIM and 3GPP, that also should be considered.
Well, I think those are driving factors that inform the choice of one or the other of these approaches. And
I suppose if you
go ahead.
I suppose if you want to define a something else, it would be a hybrid. So this argument happens, well, at least I'm involved in this argument daily, and there's this friction between people who, well, let's start with me. So like I'm old school telco engineering, but I'm, also up to date and a software developer, et cetera. So I have a long-term view. You won't hear me like the other camp criticizing waterfall and promoting agile and having those be the main mantras and saying that we can't do any of those things because those are the old ways of doing things and that's not how we got to where we are today. So we need to not do those things. But then the opposite of that then is that you just run ahead, right? And that's a great way of getting quick progress on things, right? But does it have to be one or the other? Because the run ahead thing is how you build slums, not condominiums, right? And those are two very different things, and you have to decide where you want to be. But you can do them both at the same time, right? And I always say, like, because I'm talking about the blueprints for the building, right? But if I showed up and had to take over a project that was half built and there were no blueprints, the first thing I would do is create blueprints of the existing structure, right? And then we would carry on from there. So this is the third option here is that you do both. It's not waterfall, it's cyclical, right? So activities carry on in parallel, but they need to be aligned. The danger is that if you have too much focus on the first running ahead thing, you won't ever get around to actually creating the blueprints, and you'll end up with whatever is built, right? So you can certainly proceed in that direction at that pace, but there has to be some governance that's going to bring us back to having an organization around it.
But I don't think having a data model only precludes you from having an organization, a structure, and a mechanism for evolving. I mean, Kubernetes has like a set of pretty good documentation around how to evolve the interface, how to change the models that are defined there. And then they talk a lot about the challenges of different types of API changes, of changing definitions of types and changing names, and how you go about sort of saying, well, I need a version 1, a version 2, and a version 3 of this to be coexisting together for a period of time. So talking about deprecation and removal. So I think it's possible to have a coherent and a structured way to manage evolution of your models without necessarily doing it just focused on the data models. I don't know if that was what you were getting at.
Well, you can have good governance in a single data model. That's fine. It comes back to the 3GPP stage. Well, 3GPP and ETSI and ITU all work on a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 basis, right? Stage 1 is requirements, and I don't see, and it can all be cyclical. You can go back 10 years later and add to the requirements, but I don't see how you can get much progress without having understood requirements. And that's the use cases that we've been talking about, which I think is a sort of weird way of expressing it, but you know, you have to have those requirements to understand what it is that you're going to do. Then good governance would allow you to make changes, and that's going to be important, right? So you're talking about versioning. So great, as long as we have a mechanism that we can go back and fix things when we find out that they weren't done the right way, then great, we can keep moving at a velocity. But you know, we just if all we were doing is KRMs, if that was all we were doing, then we wouldn't really need to have this discussion too much. Then the only part of that would be, how do we represent 3GPP NRMs in this environment? But I think a number of us are in agreement here that we do have to work with multiple domains.
Okay. Does
Kieran,
Go
I
ahead,
had
sorry.
my hand up for a bit. I think you're not.
Oh, sorry, I didn't glance over to the right. Sorry, go ahead.
Right, it's okay. I have the same issue. So I just thank you, Vance. I think you distilled the thinking of a lot of us pretty well, right? We can do both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We're all, well, not all of us, but I'm anxious about Agile. But at the same time, if we had gone the ORAN route of first getting all the proposals and everything in, and only then starting to write software, it would indeed, there would not be a Nefio release, right? There would be documents. The fact that we have code that does things is because we weren't waiting for the water to fall. We were going ahead with some half-baked ideas. The result is something that sometimes looks half-baked, but it doesn't mean that you can't fully bake it, right? So I'm just running ahead here with different metaphors, but I do have an idea for a real plan for governance and how we can move forward. So it's these two things at the same time. One, we have a document that shows the emergent model from what we have right now. Okay, that is kind of real life. Then we have our kind of waterfall-like design of what we think would be best, right? And both of these documents evolve. Our technique, I think, should be a diff, right? To go to a very simple engineering term, right? We look at these two documents. What is the delta between them? You know, and that delta exactly tells us what we need to do to get there, right? And it pulls it. The delta pulls in both directions, right? The idealism of waterfall sometimes hits reality. Especially deadlines, right? You know, there's time in which you can do things, but at least we have a record of that, right? We know the difference between, we know what's missing, we know the gaps, and it's only that knowledge that would be able to save us, right? Allow us to actually fill in those gaps. So I personally think this is a good approach, right? It's not agile, it's not waterfall, it's something in between. I hope I made sense with my metaphors here.
It sounded quite similar to what I was going to propose as part of this meeting series. The first, where we try and get a good set of documentation which is built out of our existing models. And we need tooling and capability to do that, so that as the models evolve, the documentation is kept up to date automatically. And that would be similar to the Kubernetes API type documentation. And then the second one is where we extrapolate our information model from that. And then what I've just added there is that sort of iterative delta diff between the defined implementation. Maybe that should be. And the updated information model. Was one comment I wanted to make on the 3GPP and Etsy and so on. I think they didn't. I mean, they started with a like a use cases and requirements into information model into data model, but they didn't start from a complete and utter. We're starting something brand new here. Like, we haven't even invented the computer yet. There was a lot of prior art and knowledge in the proprietary solutions that had existed before that, in the companies that were involved in those SDOs, which informed those standardization activities. So that's, I think, and so from this perspective, Tal, what you're sort of saying is that Nefio has started. That's this brownfield. We have already got an implementation to try to get stuff working and to showcase capability and to get an understanding of how things work. And as that matures, then we can use that to inform an information model, which we can then turn around and use to inform future development. So it's like a bootstrapping almost from the early development into the sort of standardization work and then back into the development.
Yeah, I like to think about it as Bluefield. I don't know if that's a term used a lot in your areas, but it's not greenfield and it's not brownfield. It's somewhere in between, because you do have something new, but you are still working and integrating with existing orchestration narratives, right? You're not, exactly as you said, we're not doing everything from scratch. So it's confusing sometimes, right? I think the Nefio R1 release, at least, I think a lot of people looked at it and, well, this is interesting, but how do we fit it into our existing stories? We already have orchestration stacks. Is this something completely new? You know, what do I do with my existing site registry? What do I do with my existing blueprint catalog, right? Does it interact with this in any way? So I think once we started to talk about north, south, east, west integration, suddenly we're starting to connect it to existing narratives. So my thought is Bluefield, right? We're fitting in the narratives, but we're also trying to I hesitate to say revolutionize. We're not trying to revolutionize, but we are trying to change the way things work a bit, because that's how Kubernetes works, right? Kubernetes is itself an orchestrator. So we're kind of inverting the pyramid a little bit. It's going to be complex. Yeah, I didn't invent the term Bluefield. I heard it elsewhere, so probably not everybody uses it, but thanks.
Okay. Anybody, any thoughts on that as a way of going forward? As concretely in the next meeting, I mean, first of all, does anybody think it would be a bad idea to create a user story around generating documentation from existing models as a kind of a standalone activity?
I would say it's necessary.
Okay, good. So let's just say that is, I might start drafting one and share it as soon as I put the skeleton together on the Slack channel. And then maybe we can review that next week. Then the second thing would be to spend some time talking around that process. And what I'm hearing is that we are leaning more towards this with a kind of a more Bluefieldy iterative agile approach to it, as opposed to going fully down the sort of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 approach, but we probably need to, we're leaning towards that approach of getting an information model and using it to evolve, but then also iterating in parallel. Go ahead.
Without taking up too much more time and belaboring the point, I just want to be clear. Like, in my view, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 is a very good representation of what really needs to happen. Again, whether you do it correctly or not, those are the things, whether you do it consciously or not, those are the things that need to happen. The only thing to be clear about, though, is that it's not waterfall, right? To do stage 2, you really need to have stage 1 in place, but does it need to be complete? No, right? So the correct order of things is that we need some requirements to understand that what we're going to do. But as soon as we have some, we can begin on working on stage 2. And if as soon as something is accomplished in stage 2, we can begin accomplishing something in stage 3, and that those 3 can continue to evolve. The user stories I always find a bit of a distraction, because I mean, I'm not going to argue against them, but what gets lost is that the point of the user stories is to have a story that you can then glean what the requirements are out of it. And then you can come back later and test to see that you're solving that user story. But the way that you're doing that is by understanding what the emerging requirements are and delivering on them.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 happens whether or not we explicitly have those stages and iterate through them. Is that more or less what you're saying? We do have.
That's exactly, yeah.
We're making changes to the models because we have requirements, and we have those requirements because we need more information to be shared between different systems. And that then means we've got an implicit requirement specifying a change to the information model, which then drives a change to the data model. If we don't actually follow it in that flow, then maybe that makes it harder to understand and capture the impacts on others. I think we could take that conversation into next week, and how much we kind of put formal gating criteria on those different stages and have different artifacts and handovers and all that kind of stuff, versus have a kind of a more, I don't know. We can take that in the next meeting. If anybody has any comments otherwise on the agenda or content from today, or thinks this meeting should have a different purpose, let me know. Otherwise, we can continue that discussion next week. Any last thoughts?
Oh, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, I think there's a working group 2 meeting starting in a couple of minutes, so you might want to relieve your ears from my voice anyway. Thanks very much for joining. It was a very good conversation. I think it was a good start, and hopefully there'll be a good continuation.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.